Delaney Grace Whitlock hadn't seen the mailbox in over 20 years, but she recognized it the moment her rental car crunched over the gravel and slowed to a stop. It still leaned at a slight angle, the paint long since blistered and peeled, exposing rust like blood on old metal. It let out a groan when she opened it, empty inside. Of course, no welcome notes, no condolences. She stepped out into the chilled Tennessee air, tugging her coat tighter around her frame. The late October wind clawed at her hair, laced with the scent of dead leaves and distant wood smoke. The farmhouse looked smaller than she remembered, crouched behind a curtain of bare trees, its white paint dulled to gray. Even the porch sagged slightly, as if the house was tired of standing. As Delaney approached, her boots cracked the brittle leaves beneath her. The steps creaked under her weight, different tone, same pitch. Memory and presence blurred. The screen door gave a hesitant squeak as she pushed it open. Inside, the air was still and cold. Dust hovered in the slanted afternoon light like forgotten things that didn't know how to settle. The furniture had been covered, but the house hadn't been touched in a long time. Her mother's touch was absent now, replaced by silence so thick it pressed against Delaney's eardrums. She wandered through the rooms slowly. Each one tugged at something half buried inside her. The worn carpet, the faded photographs, the spare room at the end of the hall, door shut as always. When she stepped outside again to fetch her bags, she noticed Mrs. Aldridge from across the road peering through her lace curtains. The curtains fell shut the second Delaney looked back. They still remember, and they still pretend not to. By dusk, the house had warmed enough for her to breathe without seeing it. She unpacked only the essentials. Just one suitcase, one night, maybe two. That's what she told herself. She didn't go into the spare room, not yet. The next morning brought the arrival of Trevor. Her cousin hadn't changed much, maybe a little heavier, a little more gray at the temples. But his sideways smirk was the same. He stood on the porch as if he owned it, holding a brown paper bag and a six-pack. "Didn't expect to see you back here, Del," he said, though he didn't sound surprised at all. "Thought you cut this place loose." Delaney tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "It's still mine," Trevor grinned. "Technically, for now." He pushed past her into the kitchen like he belonged there. Ramona showed up half an hour later, dressed like she was going to church, pearls and perfume and a tightly drawn smile. "My stars," she whispered, arms opening stiffly. "You look just like her." Delaney didn't answer. She hated how everyone in this town still spoke in ellipses, like there was more behind every word, every glance. They'd buried her mother, but not the whispers. They sat around the kitchen table, drinking weak coffee and pretending to care. "She never really got better," Ramona said. "But you knew that." "No," Delaney replied quietly. "I didn't." That night, Delaney stood outside the spare room again. The door had swollen with time. It took a solid shove to get it open. The room was still intact, just like her mother left it. Wallpaper faded, bed neatly made, the window cracked just enough to let in the cold. She crossed the room to the cedar chest beneath the window. Her mother had kept her childhood things there. Ribbons, a cracked snow globe, drawings of horses, and underneath it all, a letter, yellowed at the edges, her name on the envelope in her mother's uneven handwriting. No stamp. She sat on the edge of the bed and opened it with trembling fingers. "Delaney, if you're reading this, I'm probably gone. There were things I wanted to tell you, needed to, but they wouldn't let me. They said you were better off not knowing, but they were wrong. I was never sick. I was scared, and now I'm just tired. Please come back. Come home." Mama Delaney read it 3 times. The meaning didn't shift. The words remained sharp, undeniable. "They wouldn't let me. I was never sick." A cold sweat gathered at her temples. Her aunt's careful wording, the quiet insistence that her mother had slipped after the divorce, the way Delaney was packed off to live with relatives just until things got better, it all clicked into a terrible shape. The spare room was never for guests, it was for secrets. She looked around again, and for the first time, she heard it. A low groan beneath the floorboards, a whispering draft that didn't feel like wind. The house was holding something, and it had been waiting for her to ask the right question. The courthouse smelled like mildew and floor polish, an odd mixture that made Delaney's stomach twist. She sat on the edge of the cracked leather chair, the probate file clutched in her lap, her fingers smudged with carbon ink. She flipped through the pages again, though she'd already read them twice. Her mother's signature, leaning left, a little shaky, stared back at her from the bottom of the final amendment, dated just 6 months before her death. Clear, binding, witnessed. Delaney Grace Whitlock, sole heir, no conditions, no disclaimers. She swallowed hard. Trevor and Ramona had both insisted the house was a shared family asset and that Mama never finalized anything legal. Trevor had even smirked when he said it, like he was daring her to dig deeper. They didn't expect she would. And now she had proof. When Delaney returned to the farmhouse, Ramona's Buick was already parked crooked in the gravel drive. The porch door was ajar. Inside, she found them in the kitchen, Trevor leaning against the counter, arms folded, and Ramona seated stiffly at the table, coffee untouched in front of her. "You went into town?" Ramona asked, too casually. Delaney held up the folder. "I got a copy of the probate records. Mama updated her will." Trevor scoffed. "Yeah, I doubt that holds up. It's legal, stamped, signed, and notarized. She left everything to me." Ramona's jaw clenched. "She wasn't in her right mind toward the end, you know that." Delaney stepped farther into the kitchen. "You told me she didn't make changes. You lied." "She was confused," Ramona snapped. "She thought you were still 15. She thought she saw your father in the backyard one night, for God's sake." Trevor chuckled without humor. "This place isn't worth much anyway. You really want the roof caving in on your head?" Delaney didn't answer. The folder trembled slightly in her hands. They were trying to make her doubt again, just like when she was a teenager, just like when they'd said her mother needed space, that she was fragile, that it was best if Delaney left for a while. Everything was said softly. Everything was said to manipulate. And now it was happening again. That afternoon, she visited the old general store near the edge of town. Not much had changed. Same green awning, same dusty windows, same wiry man behind the counter. He looked up as she entered. His face shifted. "You're Clara's girl," he said slowly. "I'm Delaney." He nodded once. "Didn't think you'd come back." She paid for a few groceries she didn't need, just to stay a little longer. As she turned to leave, she mentioned casually, "I'm staying a while." The man blinked. "Staying?" "Yes, at the house." He didn't speak, didn't blink again, just stared, like something had gone wrong in his head. Outside, she caught Mrs. Aldridge watching again, this time from her porch. No curtains, no hiding, just watching, still. That evening, a knock at the door startled her. The sun was barely down. She opened it to find a tall man in a tan wool coat and wire-framed glasses. He looked like he belonged in an office downtown, not on her mother's rotting porch. "Harlan Keyes," he said, offering a card. "I was your mother's attorney. We spoke on the phone, briefly, when the estate was filed." Delaney stepped aside to let him in. "I didn't think you'd come all the way out here." "She asked me to, a long time ago." He didn't sit, just stood near the fireplace, his hands folded in front of him. He looked around the living room with a kind of caution, like he expected the walls to lean in and listen. "She came to see me last spring," Harlan said. "Paid in cash, quiet, nervous. It wasn't a routine visit." Delaney's mouth was dry. "Was that when she changed the will?" He nodded. "Yes. But she also said something odd." "What do you mean?" "She told me, if anything happens to me, protect my daughter from them." Delaney's breath caught. Harlan studied her face. "I assumed she meant your father, or perhaps someone from her past. But now, hearing about your relatives, Ramona and Trevor, I'm starting to think she meant them." Delaney dropped into the nearest chair. The words looped in her mind. Protect my daughter from them. Not protect her from grief, or loneliness, or herself. Them. "What did she think they were going to do to me?" Delaney whispered. "I don't know," Harlan said, "but she was afraid, and she was careful." Later, after Harlan left, Delaney sat in the living room in silence. The farmhouse felt alive somehow, its wooden bones flexing with the wind, the floorboards murmuring under the weight of memory. She thought about all the times she'd been told her mother was broken, sick, delusional. But maybe her mother hadn't been sick at all. Maybe she'd been silenced. Maybe all these years, Delaney had been the one carrying someone else's false story. The heater clicked on with a hollow thud. Outside, the porch light flickered, once, then steadied. Delaney stood and walked to the window. She saw Trevor's truck roll past the house slowly. Too slowly. No headlights. Just the dark outline of a man behind the wheel. She didn't move until the truck disappeared down the hill. She picked up the letter again that night. Her mother's handwriting trembled, but the message had not lost its urgency. They wouldn't let me. I was never sick. Delaney stared at the words, her grip tightening. They didn't want her back here, but she was. And she wasn't leaving. At 14, Delaney had never seen a person break apart in real time. She remembered the moment not in words but in fragments, the sound of glass shattering in the kitchen, the way her mother's voice wavered between lullaby and alarm, the sharp sting of Ramona's fingers gripping her arm as she was pulled from the hallway. "You don't need to see that, sweetheart," Ramona had whispered. "She's just not well. You're only making it worse by staying." Delaney hadn't moved. She'd stared through the crack in the door as her mother collapsed to the floor, hands clutching at the air like she was drowning in something no one else could see. That night, Delaney was told to pack a bag. "Just for a few days," Ramona had said, with a syrupy voice and a smile that never met her eyes. "Let things settle." A few days became years. Now, standing in the same kitchen 2 decades later, Delaney could almost hear the echoes of that breakdown woven into the walls. The quiet thrum of panic, the unspoken accusation that followed her out the door. The table was set with lace doilies and chipped china, all arranged with performative grace. Ramona buzzed from sink to counter, arranging pastries she didn't bake and pouring orange juice into a glass pitcher like it mattered. "We're having a few neighbors over," she said, smoothing her blouse. "Just a casual brunch, nothing formal. They've all been so worried about your return." Delaney raised an eyebrow. "Worried?" Ramona chuckled lightly. "Well, you know how people are. Curious, I suppose. And I thought it might be grounding for you. To reconnect. To remind everyone you're just visiting." "Right," Delaney said flatly. "Just passing through." Ramona didn't blink. "Exactly." Trevor arrived 20 minutes late, smelling of motor oil and confidence. He greeted the guests like they were extras in a play he'd already starred in. Delaney watched him from the corner of the room, trying to find the boy she'd once shared a swing set with. But the Trevor she remembered had always been 2 steps ahead, stealing the last cookie and convincing her she'd already had hers, taking the bedroom with the bigger window because boys need more air. Quiet manipulations that no one ever noticed. He stood beside her now, offering her a mimosa with that same effortless grin. "Smile," he murmured. "You're making Ramona nervous." Delaney took the glass but didn't drink. The guests asked polite questions. Ramona answered for her. "She's back just for a little while," she said brightly. "Sorting out the property, tying up loose ends. You know how these things go." Delaney smiled when required, nodded when expected. But inside, something cracked. They were still pretending, still performing, and she was still the outsider in a play she never auditioned for. After the guests left and the dishes were rinsed but not yet put away, Delaney retreated to the spare room. It smelled of dry cedar and old dust. A draft whispered through the floorboards. She sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the wall. One corner of the wooden trim had warped from moisture. Something about it caught her eye. She pried gently. The trim gave way with a dry snap, revealing a small gap in the wall. Inside, nestled behind insulation and splinters, was a singed photograph. Delaney slid it out carefully. The edges were blackened, one corner crumbling to ash in her fingers. But the image was mostly intact. Her mother stood in the center, younger, maybe 30, her smile tight but real. Beside her, a man Delaney didn't recognize. Tall, strong jaw, a face with shadows behind the eyes. He had his hand on the shoulder of a little boy. A boy who looked exactly like Trevor. Delaney stared at the photo for a long time. The resemblance was too sharp to ignore. Trevor had always been called Ramona's son, but Ramona wasn't in the picture. She sat there for an hour, the photo on her lap, her thoughts whirling like leaves in a storm. Who was the man? Why had this photo been hidden? Why burned? Why nearly destroyed, but not entirely? Her mother had hidden it behind the wall in the spare room, the same room where she wrote the letter, the same room where the air always felt just a little colder. Everything pointed back here, this house, this family, this carefully constructed lie. Later that night, Delaney stood in front of the bathroom mirror, water dripping from her chin, her face drawn and unfamiliar. What if I don't belong here at all? The question wasn't new. It had lived in her since she was 14. But it felt sharper now, closer to the bone. They'd made her feel like a guest in her own life, like an inconvenience, a piece that never quite fit the puzzle. And now she understood why. The family she'd been raised in wasn't the family she'd been born into. And maybe they'd always known that. The key was tucked behind the painting of St. Cecilia in the hallway. Delaney remembered that much. Her mother used to joke that even saints had secrets, and she'd always said it with a strange half-smile that made Delaney nervous. She reached behind the canvas now, fingertips brushing metal. The skeleton key was cold, rust-specked, and real. The doors at the end of the hallway had been locked since Delaney was a child. "Storage," Ramona had once said. "Nothing in there worth poking through." But now, standing in front of them, Delaney could hear something faint behind the wood. Air shifting, house murmurs, or just the wind trying to speak through old gaps. The key turned with a groan, and the door opened to dust and silence. The room beyond was narrow, windowless, lined with boxes stacked high and leaning slightly, like crooked gravestones. A musty smell rushed out to meet her, mildew and perfume and something older. She stepped inside, her flashlight beam slicing the dark. One of the boxes held her mother's journals, dozens of them, spiral-bound, carefully labeled, years and years of thoughts. Another held paintings, abstract, frantic things. Slashes of black and red, spirals that led to nowhere. Most of them featured a house, always the same house, always this one. One canvas showed a broken mirror with lilies curling beneath it, wilted and bleeding at the stems. In another, a figure loomed at the edge of the frame, faceless but watching. Delaney turned the page of a journal dated 8 months before her mother's breakdown. "I saw him again, by the tree line, watching. He never moves, just stares. Every time I call someone, he's gone. But I know he's real, I know it." Another entry. "Ramona says it's stress, says I should drink more tea and stop looking out windows. But I hear things in the walls. The floorboards speak at night. I'm not crazy, I'm not." Delaney sat back on her heels. The words vibrated with desperation. What if she wasn't losing her mind? What if someone wanted her to? Her childhood bedroom was exactly as she left it. The lavender curtains faded to gray. The stuffed bear on the bed still had a missing eye. A forgotten cassette player rested on the nightstand with a half-spooled tape still inside. She sat on the edge of the bed and opened the bottom drawer of her old desk. Inside, wrapped in pink ribbon, was a diary she hadn't seen in 25 years. The handwriting was childlike. The thoughts were not. "Aunt Ramona says Mom is sick again, but Mom said we're being watched. I don't know who to believe. Sometimes I hear the stairs creak at night. Sometimes Mom sleeps in my room and locks the door. Trevor told me not to ask questions. He said I'd be taken away. I think he's mad at me. I think he wants Mom to go away forever." The final entry was dated just weeks before she'd been sent to live with Ramona. "Mom cried in the hallway last night. I wanted to go to her, but the door was locked. I don't know if she's crying because she's scared or because I'm still here." Delaney closed the diary gently, her heart knocking inside her ribs. She looked around the room, untouched, preserved like a museum of false peace. The mirror above the dresser was cracked clean through the center. She hadn't noticed it until now. A moth fluttered out from the closet when she opened it, its wings faded, its path aimless. That evening she returned to the locked storage room and began pulling boxes apart one by one. Among the forgotten cables and broken lamps, she found an old television and a stack of VHS tapes labeled in her mother's careful script. Most were unmarked except for dates. But one, thicker than the rest, had a single word in black marker: basement. The VCR was slow to warm up, and the image jittered at first. The grainy footage flickered into view, static washing over faint outlines. Then the cellar appeared, filmed from an angle she couldn't place. The camera must have been hidden. The timestamp read 3 weeks before her mother's death. Delaney leaned in. At first, the cellar was empty. Then Ramona entered the frame, dragging something. Someone, her mother. Delaney's breath caught. The figure was limp, struggling, one shoe missing. Ramona's expression was terrifying in its calmness, focused, efficient, like she was carrying groceries. She opened the storage freezer, shoved her sister's body inside, alive or not, Delaney couldn't tell, then shut the lid. The screen crackled and went black. Delaney didn't scream. She didn't cry. She sat frozen on the floor for what felt like hours, hands clasped around her knees, the echo of the footage looping in her skull. She remembered the scent of lilies at the funeral, how wilted they'd looked, how Ramona had pressed her hands so tightly together during the service, lips barely moving as she mouthed the Lord's Prayer. She remembered Trevor nudging her and whispering, she was already gone before she hit the floor. But that hadn't been grief. That had been something else. She rose slowly, limbs trembling, and returned to the hallway. The house groaned around her. Wind pushed through the eaves. Moths beat against the window glass like they were trying to get in. In the mirror, her reflection stared back, split clean down the center by the crack. She no longer knew what parts of her memory were real. But the house remembered. And now so did she. The cause of death read heart failure. No underlying conditions, no autopsy requested, no toxicology ordered. Delaney stared at the coroner's report spread across the dining table. The typeface was cold, clinical, utterly detached from the frantic energy that had pulsed through her mother's final months, at least according to the journals. Heart failure, and yet no mention of medications, no cardiologist, no long-term diagnosis, just a sudden ending tied in a bow. Like the town wanted her to stop asking. She had already visited the coroner's office that morning, a squat brick building that smelled faintly of Lysol and cigarettes. Dr. Ritchie was graying, with a practiced smile that didn't reach his eyes. He welcomed her in, but his answers had the shape of someone avoiding truth. She was found unresponsive, he repeated, his voice low and rehearsed. No signs of trauma. The family didn't request further examination. I'm the family, Delaney said. A pause. Well, not the one who signed the release. He wouldn't look her in the eye after that. Later that afternoon, Delaney met Harlan at his office, tucked behind the courthouse. It was there she met Clara Bell, his assistant, mid-30s, sharp-eyed and efficient, with a quiet edge to her curiosity. Clara had read Delaney's face in seconds. You think someone lied. I think someone rewrote her life, Delaney murmured, and erased the parts that didn't fit. Harlan handed her a folder of estate filings, but it was Clara who spoke next. If you give me a couple days, I can dig into the archives. Social services, case filings, medical logs, things that wouldn't be in a public obituary. Delaney met her gaze. You do that? Clara nodded. Sometimes what's buried tells more than what's left out in the open. That night, Delaney sat alone in the living room, her mother's journals stacked at her feet. The room smelled faintly of old wood and something fading, maybe time, maybe memory. She hadn't allowed herself to think about the guilt. Not fully. But it crept in now. I should have come back sooner. I should have called more. Written, asked harder questions. But every time she tried, Ramona intercepted, with words like, she's resting, she's not stable, it's best you focus on school. Delaney had wanted to believe Ramona, needed to, and that need had cost her. She fell asleep on the couch and woke up in the early morning haze, her mother's voice echoing from a half-buried memory. Don't trust Ramona, baby, not when I'm gone. The memory hit like a slap, clear, immediate, terrifying. Her mother had whispered it one night while brushing Delaney's hair in the dark. Delaney hadn't understood it then. She remembered nodding, but Ramona's hands had been on the doorknob moments later, calling her to bed, smiling too tightly, and the words vanished into the ether of childhood confusion. Until now. 2 days later, Clara called her back. I found something, she said over the phone, her voice tense. You might want to come in. Delaney drove to Harlan's office in silence, the weight of something unspoken pressing against her chest. Clara was waiting with a sealed manila envelope. This wasn't easy to get, she said. Sealed records, but, well, Harlan's name still opens doors in this town. What I found isn't just about your mom. Clara laid the papers out on the desk. It was a CPS report, filed when Delaney was 14. She scanned the summary, her pulse loud in her ears. The report stated that Delaney had exhibited signs of psychological distress, aggression, and claimed to be hearing voices. It claimed her mother's instability had been inherited and that Delaney posed a safety risk to herself and others. Delaney looked up, stunned. This isn't true. I never. Clara pointed to the bottom of the page, filed by Ramona Whitlock. Delaney's vision blurred, her hands shook. She said I was dangerous. It got you removed from your home, Clara said quietly. It gave her legal leverage. But why would she do that? I don't know yet, but whatever happened to your mother started long before her death. And I think Ramona was making sure no one would believe either of you. Delaney didn't speak. She couldn't. The report in front of her didn't just contradict the story she'd lived. It destroyed it. She'd spent years believing she was taken away because her mother couldn't cope. But now it was clear. She was taken away because her mother wouldn't let go of the truth. And Ramona had rewritten the ending. That evening, Delaney sat in the spare room, the envelope in her lap, surrounded by journals and half-burned photographs, and truths that had waited too long. Mothers didn't just vanish. They were erased, slowly, methodically, and with the kind of silence that eats memory from the inside out. But Delaney wasn't a child anymore, and she wasn't going to be silent. Delaney sat in the front row of the county courthouse, her palms pressed against her skirt to hide the tremble. The hearing hadn't even started, and already she could feel the weight of eyes, curious, skeptical, waiting to see if the girl who left town broken would now shatter on the stand. She glanced over at Ramona, seated with her attorney, a smug man in a navy blazer who looked like he hadn't lost a probate case in decades. Ramona wore her Sunday pearls, hair swept up, face perfectly still. She didn't look at Delaney. She didn't need to. She'd already started speaking through other channels. Whispers had grown in town like rot. She's fragile, just like her mother was. She's not well. Did you hear what she said about the will? Must be grief talking. Trevor wasn't in the courtroom, but Delaney had no doubt he was behind the curtain somewhere, pulling strings with the same quiet manipulation he'd mastered as a boy. The formal petition to contest the will had arrived in a white envelope with blue ink, like it was just another polite disagreement. Ramona claimed Delaney's mother had not been of sound mind when she amended the will, that the updated document was the result of delusion, coercion, or both. Delaney's name, her claim, was now a courtroom battle, as if her grief had to be litigated. She remembered being 14, sitting in a two-white room while a man with a notepad asked her to describe her moods. Her mother had just been hospitalized. Ramona told the court it was for everyone's safety. She'd also insisted Delaney be evaluated as a precaution. The diagnosis came quickly, major depressive disorder. But no one asked her why she didn't want to speak. No one asked about the nights she'd wake up to whispers outside her door, or the times Trevor took things from her and laughed when she cried, or the way Ramona always used her own kindness like a leash. Delaney wasn't depressed. She was trapped, and no one believed children when the people hurting them smiled so nicely in public. The hearing began with procedural formalities, evidence entered into record, documentation acknowledged, objections noted and tabled. Then came the testimonies. Harlan was composed, walking the judge through the updated will, the paperwork, the signatures, the timeline. She paid in cash, he noted, came to my office alone, requested privacy. Her mental state was lucid, focused, and deeply concerned about the safety of her daughter. Ramona's attorney countered smoothly. You're telling me a woman known to have breakdowns, who believed she was being watched, somehow navigated a major legal amendment alone without pressure? Harlan didn't blink. She didn't believe she was being watched. She was. We have evidence suggesting her paranoia may have been warranted. Speculation, the opposing counsel snapped. Protection, Harlan said. You don't bury a truth like this unless someone wants it forgotten. Ramona took the stand late afternoon. Her voice was soft, measured, her words stitched together with practiced grace. My sister suffered terribly near the end, she said. She often confused reality with her imagination. She claimed people were breaking into the house. She thought the neighbors were spying. She once accused me of trying to drug her tea. She turned slightly toward Delaney, eyes brimming. And Delaney, poor thing, she was just a girl, too young to carry the burden of her mother's mind unraveling. She began having episodes of her own. The sadness ran in the blood. Delaney gripped the table edge until her knuckles whitened. Her turn came. Clara sat behind her, steady and silent. Harlan gave a nod. Delaney walked to the stand slowly, every step echoing like a drumbeat. She took the oath and sat, spine straight, voice quiet but unwavering. "My mother was afraid," she said, "but not of things that didn't exist. She kept journals, hundreds of pages, about being followed, manipulated, and shut out of her own life by people she trusted." "Is it possible," Ramona's attorney asked, "that these were the writings of someone unwell?" "Yes," Delaney said. "But they were also consistent, clear. She didn't spiral, she documented. And she wasn't wrong." He stepped closer. "And your own medical history? You were diagnosed with depression, weren't you?" "I was misdiagnosed," Delaney said. "I wasn't sick. I was silenced," he scoffed. "So you're saying the doctors, the system, and your family were all wrong?" "I'm saying they were working from the story Ramona gave them." Then came the twist. A woman stood from the back of the room, older, in a faded cardigan and large glasses. Everyone turned. Even the judge leaned forward. "I have a statement," she said. "I live next door to the Whitlock property. I was never asked, but I remember." She was sworn in. "My name is Mildred Hayes. The night Clara died. Excuse me, Delaney's mother. I saw something." Silence blanketed the room. "I was in my garden," Mildred said. "It was after 9. I saw Trevor and Ramona behind the house. They had a barrel, one of those steel drum ones. They were feeding it papers, files, boxes. They burned everything. I thought it was just spring cleaning, until I heard Ramona say, 'That's the last of her.'" Gasps. A shuffle of bodies. Delaney stared at Mildred. She had never spoken to the woman, had passed her mailbox countless times. "You're sure it was that night?" the judge asked. Mildred nodded. "It was the same night the ambulance came. I remember. I watched it from the kitchen." Court was recessed amid a flurry of motion. Ramona's lawyer whispered furiously in her ear. She looked pale. For the first time, uncertain. Delaney stepped outside, Clara following behind. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the sidewalk. But something inside Delaney had lifted. A weight, a lie. Something that had pressed on her chest for years. They'd tried to erase her mother, erase her, but memory, like truth, leaves traces, and now they were speaking. The laundry room always smelled faintly of bleach and old dust, but Delaney had stopped trusting surface scents days ago. Now, everything in the house felt like it was hiding something. Beneath wallpaper seams, under layers of paint, behind faces that smiled too widely. She stared at the warped tile in the back corner just beside the utility sink. The discoloration hadn't been noticeable at first, but once seen, it refused to fade. Like a bruise on the house itself. Delaney dropped to her knees, pried up the linoleum edge with a flathead screwdriver, and peeled it back. The sound echoed sharp and cruel. Underneath, wood, dark, dry, splintered, and stained. She scraped away the dirt and time with slow, shaking fingers. A patch of dried blood, almost black now, had pooled along the edge of the baseboard, small but deep. She sat back, breath catching in her throat. Suddenly, she was on the phone again, weeks before her mother died. The memory came uninvited, but vivid. "Mama?" A pause, then whispering, "Delaney, I can't talk long. They're moving things. I hear them at night." "Mama, who?" "They want the land. That's what this is about. Don't believe them. If anything happens." A crash in the background, her mother's breath, sharp, clipped. "You make them show you everything. Not just the papers. The floorboards." Then silence. The line had gone dead. She hadn't understood it then. Now, staring at the blood dried into the grain, she did. That evening, Clara met her at the edge of the porch, breathless from running. "I found something," she said, handing Delaney a folded printout. "You're not going to believe this." Delaney scanned it. It was a geological report, buried in an old environmental impact study archived at the county clerk's office. The Whitlock property sat on land rich in rare earth minerals, the kind used in technology, batteries, clean energy manufacturing. Estimates placed the value well into the millions. "It was classified as non-commercial decades ago," Clara said, But that changed when they found mineral seams extending from the mining site 2 miles north. Delaney looked up, thunderstruck. No one ever told her. No one wanted to, but someone knew. Ramona's motives, once buried under layers of concern and whispers about mental illness, suddenly made sharp, cruel sense. She hadn't just wanted control, she'd wanted the land. Later, while searching a locked cabinet in the master bedroom closet, Delaney found a bundle of legal papers tucked behind old linens. She unfolded them carefully. Another will, unsigned, but clearly dated 2 weeks after the one currently in probate. This one named Trevor as the sole heir, should my daughter, Delaney Grace Whitlock, not be locatable or unable to accept inheritance. There was a place for her mother's signature. It was blank. Delaney sat on the edge of the bed, heart pounding. This wasn't a contingency plan. It was a backup, an exit door forged quietly just in case. They were planning for her to disappear. She flipped the page. A post-it note was stuck to the back in her mother's handwriting. They keep asking about the land. I said no, they didn't like that. Delaney folded the papers, her hands shaking, and placed them in a new envelope. She didn't know whether to feel sick or vindicated. Her mother hadn't lost her mind. She'd lost control of a legacy everyone else wanted to bury her under. That night, Delaney returned to the laundry room. She ran her fingers across the bloodstain again, her skin cold. Her mother hadn't fallen ill. She had been hunted, cornered, and silenced by people who claimed to love her, by people who were supposed to protect her, by family. Delaney stood, turned off the light, and locked the door behind her, not to hide the blood, but to preserve the truth. The headlines were slick and cruel. Local woman returns home to claim inheritance. Stirring family rift, mental illness runs in the blood. Whitlock family drama reignites. Daughter or opportunist? The town watches. Ramona hadn't just hired a lawyer, she'd hired a narrative. She fed it through the right mouths, dropped phrases like unstable and estranged to the press, and soon Delaney's name was back in the town's collective mouth. But not the way she'd hoped. Strangers eyed her in grocery aisles. Conversations stopped when she walked past the post office. She saw her photo online, grainy and angled wrong, beneath captions that questioned her motives, her mental state, her mother's death. It was like the story was happening again. But this time she was cast as the villain, and worse, she was starting to believe it. Delaney hadn't slept more than an hour at a time in days. She kept waking to sounds, creaking floors, knocking pipes, the low growl of a voice she could never quite locate. Once she saw her mother in the mirror, standing just behind her, face blank, mouth moving in silence. Her hands trembled when she tried to write. The house felt too tight, the walls always listening. She began locking her bedroom door at night, though she couldn't say why. The journals no longer comforted her. They accused. The house no longer protected her. It pulsed. "I'm losing it," she whispered to Clara, who had brought her coffee and the look of someone trying not to panic. "No," Clara said firmly. "They want you to feel that way. That's the whole strategy." Delaney shook her head. "What if they're right? What if I am like her? You're not. You're fighting. That's different." Clara slid a file across the table. "I found something," she said. "You need to see this." It was Trevor's juvenile record, sealed but accessed through quiet channels Clara never explained. "Petty theft, vandalism, physical assault," she said, pointing to lines highlighted in red. "A pattern of aggression starting at 12. He was sent to a correctional school out of state when he was 15. Ramona never mentioned it." Delaney stared. She told everyone he went to live with his father. Trevor's biological father was never named. The words hung heavy between them. Clara hesitated, then placed another folder on the table. "This is yours." Delaney's chest tightened. "My what?" "Your sealed juvenile file. I had to really dig. It was filed under a partial alias, Delaney Grace W., not Whitlock." Delaney flipped it open, already bracing. The document was full of fabricated behavioral reports. Allegations of hallucinations, emotional outbursts, violent behavior. She didn't remember any of it because it hadn't happened. All of it was signed and submitted by Ramona. "She created a legal record," Delaney whispered, "to make sure no one would ever believe me, to make sure you wouldn't believe yourself." Later that evening, Sheriff Henry Langford knocked on the door. He was older, thick-shouldered, and careful with his words. He'd served the town for nearly 30 years. But today, his usual stiffness was replaced with something closer to concern. "I've been getting calls," he said, hat in his hand, "and not the kind that go away with time." He looked around the house. "You're digging, Delaney. And whatever you're digging into, people are noticing." Delaney didn't flinch. "Did you know my mother's cause of death was never investigated? That the only person who signed her release was the same one who now wants the land?" Langford gave a slow nod. "We're reopening the file, quietly, for now. But I'll tell you this, people here have long memories and short attention spans. You make a wrong move, they'll turn on you fast." "I'm not going anywhere," she said. "You might not have to. The truth's already leaking." Clara returned a day later with another envelope, this one thick, heavy, and sealed with the kind of tension that clung before a storm. "Do you remember," she asked gently, "when we talked about Trevor's father never being named?" Delaney blinked. "Yes. I found something in the old clinic files, an order for a DNA test from the hospital. I had it rerun, quietly." Delaney's heart beat once, then again, slower. "I thought Trevor wasn't related to me," she said. "Just Ramona's son." Clara shook her head. "Trevor isn't Ramona's son." The envelope opened with a rip that sounded louder than thunder. Inside, results. Trevor Whitlock, 99.8% probability, half-sibling match to Delaney Grace Whitlock. Her hands went cold. "He's your half-brother," Clara said. "Same father, different mothers. That's why Ramona raised him. That's why she couldn't let your mother talk." Delaney stepped back, stomach twisting. Trevor, the cousin who locked her out of rooms, who watched her cry with cold amusement, wasn't a cousin at all. He was her brother. And that meant someone had orchestrated this, kept them apart, twisted their lives, rewritten the bloodline. Delaney wasn't paranoid. She'd been groomed to be powerless. But now, she had proof. And she wasn't powerless anymore. The wind came first. It howled through the window panes, slipping through the cracks in the old farmhouse like it was trying to get in. Or get out. The porch creaked. The trees bent forward. Inside, the air tightened like lungs holding a final breath. Delaney stood in the living room, the letter in her pocket, the DNA results clutched in her fist. She didn't wait for Ramona to knock. She called her and told her to come. And Ramona came, dressed in pearls, spine straight, mouth pulled into that thin-lipped smile that had always meant danger. "You've stirred up quite a mess," Ramona said as she walked in, barely glancing at the peeling walls, the scattered papers, the shattered photo frame on the hallway table. "Just like your mother did." Delaney didn't move. "I know about Trevor." Ramona blinked. Just once, slowly. "I know he's my half-brother. I know about the second will, about the CPS lies, the blood in the laundry room, all of it." Ramona gave a small, humorless laugh. "You think any of that changes what's coming? The land is ours. It always was. Your mother was in the way. She was your sister. She was a problem," Ramona snapped. "Soft, fragile. She didn't have what it took to keep this family afloat. She wanted to waste this place, let it rot out of pride. That land needed someone who could use it, someone strong enough to deserve it." Delaney's throat was dry. "So you drugged her, gaslit her, took her son." Ramona stepped closer, voice dropping. "She let me. You want the truth? Fine. She begged me to raise him. She couldn't handle him, just like she couldn't handle anything else. That's what weakness looks like." Delaney felt the house tighten again, groaning beneath the storm. A childhood photo, perched too close to the window, toppled and hit the floor with a crack. "I used to think she broke," Delaney whispered. "But you broke her." "She was already cracked," Ramona hissed. "You're no different." The mirror above the mantel, already fractured from years of cold, split clean down the center with a sudden pop. Shards hit the floor, glittering like truth in broken light. Delaney flinched, but Ramona didn't. "She saw shadows in corners," Ramona said softly. "And now you do too, don't you?" Delaney's breath caught. "You hear things. Wake up afraid. You're not strong, Delaney. You're a copy, another weak woman holding on to ghosts." Delaney stepped forward. Her voice didn't shake. I'm the one who came back. I'm the one who stayed. You've spent your life lying because you couldn't handle the truth. About Trevor, about my mother, about what you are." Ramona's face cracked, not visibly, not fully, But something in her eyes wavered. Then the front door swung open. Sheriff Langford stood in the doorway, his coat soaked from the rain. His face was pale. "We found something," he said quietly. Ramona turned slowly. Delaney didn't blink. Langford took off his hat. His voice was low, grave. "In the cellar. We were reviewing the footage you gave us, the VHS. It wasn't just a struggle. There was blood, too much. We opened the floor beneath the freezer." He looked between them. "There are remains, skeletal." Human Ramona went still. No protest, no feigned confusion, just silence. The house groaned again, louder this time. A high-pitched whine came from the pipes, or the wind, or maybe the walls themselves. Delaney stepped forward. Her voice was quieter now, but colder. "Tell the sheriff what you did." Ramona turned her eyes to her and smiled. "I survived." Later, when they took her away, Ramona didn't scream. She just walked out the door like she owned it, chin high, eyes forward. But the house screamed for her. The wind slammed the back door. A shutter tore loose and clattered against the siding. Upstairs, the bedroom light flickered on, then off, then on again. Clara touched Delaney's arm. "She's gone." Delaney nodded slowly, but the house still remembered. And now finally it had spoken. Delaney sat at the plaintiff's table, spine straight, breath shallow, fingers clenched around the edge of her chair. The courtroom smelled of old wood, paper, and something stale, like the past had been bottled up too long and was finally letting itself out. To her right, Clara sat still and composed, her presence a quiet anchor. Harlan, steady as ever, reviewed his notes. Across the aisle, Ramona stared forward with an expression carved from marble. Trevor sat beside her, jaw tight, his leg bouncing under the table like it might run without him. The judge called the room to order. It began. The first hour was clinical. Evidence entered, timelines reviewed, property boundaries traced on overhead monitors. But it was the witness testimonies that cracked the room open. Clara was first. She detailed the sealed juvenile reports, Delaney's and Trevor's, the lies, the manipulation, the inconsistencies. She was painted unstable by someone with everything to gain if she disappeared, Clara said. And for over 20 years, no one questioned it. Not until Delaney returned. Then came the forensic expert, a woman with gray streaks in her hair and an unwavering voice. "We matched blood from the laundry room floor to Clara Whitlock, Delaney's mother," she said. "We also analyzed remains found beneath the cellar. Cause of death: blunt force trauma to the head, consistent with struggle. Time of death: within 24 hours of the documented cardiac event." A murmur swept through the courtroom. Ramona remained still. Trevor flinched. Delaney took the stand last. She spoke slowly, carefully, her voice shaking only once, when she mentioned the phone call. "She was scared," she said. "She told me they wanted the land. She said if anything happened to her, I had to look beneath the floorboards. She knew they wouldn't stop." She held up the unsigned will. "They tried to erase me. They almost did." The judge nodded gravely. "Thank you, Miss Whitlock." Then it was Trevor's turn. He resisted at first, but the pressure built with every question, every contradiction, every inconsistency between his testimony and what the evidence showed. "You were present the night of Clara Whitlock's death?" the prosecutor asked. I mean, I came over, late." "You helped dispose of documents." Ramona said it was just old files." "Did you see your aunt alive after that?" Trevor's mouth opened, then closed. He looked at Ramona, then broke. "I didn't kill her," he said, voice rising. "I didn't kill her. I just helped clean up." The courtroom gasped. Ramona didn't move, but something cracked beneath her expression. The corner of her mouth twitched. Her left eye blinked once, and then again. Trevor slumped forward in the witness box, hands over his face. When Ramona was called, the room fell to silence. She approached the stand like she was entering a stage, composed, slow, each step deliberate. Under oath, she was careful, measured, until the DNA tests were presented. "You claim Trevor was your son," the prosecutor said, laying the documents on the rail. "Yet tests confirm he is the biological son of Clara Whitlock, and the father." He paused, waiting. Ramona's hands tightened around the edge of the witness stand. "Would you like to clarify who the father is?" She didn't answer. "Is it true that the father of both Trevor and Delaney is the same man?" Her silence screamed. "Would you like to tell the court who that man was?" Ramona looked at Delaney, and finally, something inside her snapped. Her voice was flat, broken. "He was mine." Delaney blinked. Ramona turned toward the judge. Her words dropped like stones. "My husband, John Whitlock, he was Delaney's father, and Trevor's." The room erupted, gasps. A woman in the back crossed herself. Harlan muttered something under his breath. Delaney went completely still. She felt her body trying to protect her from the truth by numbing everything. Ramona's voice pressed on. She was a mistake, a weakness. Clara knew it. That's why she couldn't raise her. That's why I had to fix it. "You mean erase it," the prosecutor said quietly. Ramona didn't respond. The judge recessed the courtroom for 10 minutes. Delaney sat frozen. Clara squeezed her hand. "You don't have to carry this," she whispered. "None of this was yours to bear." But it was now. The verdict came swift and final. The court upheld Clara Whitlock's amended will. The estate, the house, the land. It was all Delaney's. Ramona would be formally charged. Trevor, too. But none of it felt like victory. It felt like survival, with splinters. Outside the courthouse, the sun had begun to set, casting long shadows down the courthouse steps. Delaney stood there a long time. She looked up toward the horizon, wondering if ghosts ever stopped whispering once the truth was known. She doubted it, but at least now they were whispering to everyone. The house stood still now. No voices, no footsteps, no murmurs in the walls, just the soft creak of old beams settling into silence, like the bones of something finally at rest. Delaney stood on the porch in the late afternoon light, watching wind move across the fields like memory. She could still hear the low hum of her mother's lullaby, braided into the sound of breeze through tall grass. She had inherited the house, but she hadn't kept it. Instead, she kept the land, the bones of it, the story of it, and sold the mineral rights, millions, not for comfort, for legacy. Within 3 months, she'd funded the first of what would become a regional network of mental health centers, places named not for her, but for her mother. The Clara Grace Initiative, because women like her mother shouldn't be remembered as warnings. They should be remembered as warnings unheeded. Delaney walked through the farmhouse one final time, fingers brushing along faded wallpaper, the edge of a photograph frame, the surface of the dresser in the spare room. She stopped in her childhood bedroom, now stripped bare, and sank to the floor. The silence pressed close, but not in menace now, in grief. She curled her knees to her chest and let the sobs come. 25 years of questions, of blame, of swallowed stories and half-memory, of being told to be quiet and obedient and wrong. She cried for her mother, for herself, for the girl who used to press her ear to the floorboards and wonder why no one ever said her name like it mattered. Flashbacks came like echoes in the dust. Her mother in the kitchen, humming as she stirred soup. The way her hands brushed Delaney's hair at night. The gentle smile in the garden, before the fear crept in. Laughter under the sun, running barefoot through the wheat field behind the barn, wind catching in her hair. Her mother watching, distant but proud. That had been real. It hadn't all been sorrow. The verdicts had come swiftly. Trevor was sentenced to 18 years, accessory to manslaughter, destruction of evidence, obstruction of justice. He had cried in court, but not for Delaney, not for her mother, only for himself. Ramona was declared unfit to stand trial. Her breakdown, when it finally arrived, had been total. She was committed to a state institution, where she refused to speak. Delaney didn't visit. Closure didn't require confrontation anymore, only distance. It was Clara who brought the final truth. They sat on the back porch, the fields turning gold with evening, crickets chirping their slow lullaby. Delaney was sipping tea. Her body felt lighter now, but not whole. Not yet. Clara was quiet for a long time, then softly, "I knew you." Delaney looked up. Clara's eyes held something, regret, recognition. "I was a social worker, 25 years ago, fresh out of school. I was assigned to your case, briefly." Delaney's breath hitched. "I didn't know," Clara continued. "Not then. I thought I was helping. But I was so green. And Ramona had all the right papers. All the right words." She swallowed hard. "I signed off on your removal." The silence between them thickened, but didn't break. Delaney looked down at her hands. Why did you help me now? Clara's voice cracked. Because I never forgot your name. Delaney nodded. Tears welled, but didn't fall. Then let's make sure no one else forgets it either. Later that night, Delaney walked through the house one last time, her mother's humming in her ears. She left a single thing behind. A framed photo of her and her mother, hand in hand in the garden, sunlight caught in their smiles. She placed it on the mantel, where the mirror once shattered. This time, the glass held, and so did she. Delaney knelt in the soil where her mother used to grow marigolds and lavender, her fingers dark with dirt, her heart quiet for the first time in decades. The garden had been overrun when she inherited it. Twisted ivy, broken fencing, patches of stubborn weeds. But underneath it all, the bones were good. Like the house, like her. Today it was blooming again. Poppies swayed beside restored wooden benches. Lavender lined the edges. Wind chimes danced overhead, whispering their small music into the spring air. A canvas easel stood in the shade of the old maple tree. Watercolors were laid out in wide trays, brushes soaking in jars. Delaney looked up at the half-dozen women and girls scattered across the lawn. Some painted in silence, others chatted softly. The youngest, barely 12, drew spirals over and over again, the way Delaney once had in her childhood notebooks. A former patient from the Clara Grace Center sat nearby, sketching a figure made of roots and sky. This was what she'd built. Not a monument, not revenge, restoration. Delaney walked between easels, offering encouragement with a soft word or nod. She didn't hover, she didn't correct. This wasn't about perfection, it was about space, safe space, something she'd needed once and never had. Her mother's journals had spoken of this garden often before the fear set in. This is where I remember who I was, she'd once written, where the world stops spinning and I'm just Clara. Delaney understood that now. The garden remembered too. Later, she stood at the back fence with a cup of cold hibiscus tea, watching clouds roll past the sun. A voice called from behind the trellis. Delaney Grace Whitlock? She turned. It was Mrs. Aldridge, the neighbor who used to watch her through the curtains. Today, the old woman carried a pie in a tin wrapped in a cloth embroidered with sunflowers. She smiled, awkward but sincere. I figured it's about time I stopped pretending you weren't here. Delaney blinked, then smiled. It's good to see you. Mrs. Aldridge held out the pie. Welcome back. Thank you. No, the woman said firmly. Not welcome back, just welcome. Delaney held the pie in both hands, the weight of it oddly grounding. Her name still echoed in her ears. Delaney Grace Whitlock, not the girl who left, not Clara's daughter, not just passing through, just her. That evening, as the sun set in hues of copper and rose, Delaney sat on the porch, a single journal in her lap. Not her mother's, hers. Blank pages. A new beginning. The house behind her no longer groaned. The shadows didn't lean quite so heavy. The mirror in the hallway remained intact, and when she passed it, she saw herself clearly. No fractures. No ghosts. Just the woman who stayed. Her voice spoke softly, low, grounded, and sure. Not to anyone else. Just to herself. They said I was just passing through. Said I wouldn't last. Said I'd run like she did. Said I'd break, but I didn't. I stayed, and I stayed loud. And in the house that once tried to silence her, the wind passed through open windows without fear. The walls did not scream anymore. They listened. If stories of buried truth, generational scars, and women who rise speak to you, stay with us. There's more where Delaney came from. More voices silenced. More legacies reclaimed. This isn't just fiction, it's a reckoning, and it's only just begun.